Hey, welcome. We've all thought about it. Someone's mistake messes things up for you, and you get hurt. It seems obvious they should be responsible, right? But what about when it's a totally new situation? Something a court has never seen before? How in the world do they decide who's on the hook? Well, that's the Highwire Act we're diving into today.
I mean, it seems like it should be simple. Someone messes up, you get hurt, they pay. But the law, it's almost never that simple. What if the harm was totally indirect? Or maybe it was just a financial hit, no physical damage at all? Or what if it happened in some bizarre way that nobody could have predicted? This is where judges can't just flip to page 50 of the rulebook for the answer. They have to figure it out from scratch.
All right, so how do they actually pull this off? Here's our roadmap. We're going to start in what's called the legal gray area. Then we'll open up the special toolkit that judges use, these things called salient features. We'll see that toolkit in action with a really fascinating real-world case, then look at the policy breaks that can stop the whole process in its tracks. And finally, we'll see how it all comes down to a really delicate balance.
Okay, first up, the legal gray area. This is ground zero for any of these tough novel cases. So imagine this. It's totally foreseeable that an action could cause harm, but there's no law, no precedent for that exact situation. This is that gray area. Now, the court can't just throw up its hands and say, sorry, no rule, no case. It's at a crossroads. Does it step in and create a brand new duty of care right then and there? This is where the real judicial heavy lifting begins. So how do they build this new duty from scratch? Well, they don't just wing it. They use a very specific set of tools, what the law calls salient features. You can think of these as the essential building blocks, the key ingredients that suggest a relationship of responsibility should exist. And this toolkit basically has 4 key questions. First, they look at vulnerability. They ask, was the person who got hurt basically helpless here? Could they have reasonably protected themselves? Second is reliance. Did the victim depend on the other person to be careful? Third, assumption of responsibility. Did the person who caused the harm kind of take on responsibility for the situation? And finally, and this one's huge, control. Who was really in the driver's seat? Who had the power to prevent this whole mess? Answering these builds the case, piece by piece. All right, theory is one thing, but let's see how this toolkit actually works in the real world. We're going to look at a landmark Australian case, Pear versus Apand. This isn't just an academic exercise. This is how it gets done. So here's the setup. You've got this big company, Apand, that supplies potato seeds. They sell diseased seeds to one farm. The big problem? This disease triggers a quarantine zone around that farm, and the neighboring farmers, who had nothing to do with Apand, are suddenly banned from selling their totally healthy potatoes to a really profitable export market. They've lost a fortune, but here's the twist. Not a single one of their potatoes was harmed. It's a purely financial loss. So should Apand be on the hook for that? And boom, this is where that toolkit comes into play. You can see exactly how the court broke it down. First, vulnerability. I mean, these farmers were completely exposed. They had no way of knowing their neighbor was using bad seeds and no way to protect themselves from the fallout. Next, reliance. Even though they weren't direct customers, the whole farming community was relying on a massive supplier like Apand not to introduce a catastrophic disease into the area. But the real clincher was control. Who had control over the risk? Apand. Only Apand. They were the one and only party who could have prevented this harm from happening in the first place. You line up these features, and the case for duty of care becomes incredibly powerful. So, you see how all those pieces just click into place? The court saw that too, and made a really groundbreaking decision. It said yes, Apand did owe a duty of care to those neighboring farmers to protect them from this kind of purely economic loss. And just like that, using the toolkit, a new duty of care was born. But hold on. It's not over yet. Even if every single one of those salient features is screaming yes, the court has one last critical step. It has to hit the brakes and do a reality check. It has to ask, okay, this seems fair for these two people, but would creating this new duty be bad for society as a whole? And there are 2 main policy breaks they worry about. The first one is something called indeterminate liability, which, well, it's basically the floodgates argument. The court has to avoid creating a situation where this one person is now liable to an unknowable number of people for an unknowable amount of money forever. They are terrified of that. The second big break is all about resource allocation, especially for public bodies. If we create a new legal duty for the police or local council, will it force them to divert their limited time and money away from everything else they're supposed to be doing? And these cases show exactly how those breaks work. Take the Hill case. The court said, look, we can't make the police legally responsible for protecting every single citizen from every possible crime. Why? Because they'd get so bogged down in lawsuits and what's called defensive policing that they couldn't do their actual job of investigating crime effectively. And in Stoven versus Wise, the court said no to forcing a council to fix a dangerous road, worrying that it would open the door to them being sued over every pothole and blind corner in the country, draining public funds.
Okay, let's bring this all together. We've seen the engine that builds a duty of care, the salient features, and we've seen the brakes that can stop it, public policy. It all comes down to a really delicate balance.
So what this all boils down to is that a duty of care in these new, tricky cases, it's not a simple math problem. There's no easy formula. It's a judgment call. It's this careful judicial balancing act between what's fair for the specific people in front of the court and what the potential ripple effects of that decision could be for everyone else.
So, if you take one thing away, it should be this. Every time a court faces one of these cases, it's caught in this massive tug of war. On one side of the rope, you have the powerful human need to do justice for the individual who was harmed. But on the other side, you have the critical need to protect the practical, day-to-day functioning of society, to make sure the law doesn't spiral out of control and paralyze everyone. And that really leaves us with the billion-dollar question that judges have to wrestle with every single time. And, as our world gets crazier and more complex, with things like AI and climate change creating totally new ways to cause harm, where exactly does the law draw that incredibly fine line between one person's responsibility and the burdens we all have to carry as a society? That's the balancing act. Thanks for tuning in.